and welcome back to It's Not a Sport After Dark. In this episode, we're going to be talking about World of Warcraft Wrath of the Lich King. It came out a little bit over 3 to 4 weeks ago. Everyone's leveling, everyone's raiding, and the game is a lot of fun. I actually really enjoyed my time with it. So we're going to talk about my time with it, comparing it to other MMOs that I've played and what I think about it, comparing about my experience with TBC, which I made a video about when that released about a year or two ago. So let's get into it, talk about Wrath of the Lich King. So my goals going into this were to, again, really try to explore WoW. This is from what I've heard, one of WoW's greatest expansions. People love Wrath of the Lich King. It was that when WoW was at its peak, and it was absolutely a joy to play. And I can see why. This expansion it's pretty easy. It's super casual. There's nothing kind of blocking you from content. There's no barriers to entry. You just kind of get in it and you can just play as much as you want, which made it really easy for someone like me to understand the game and get into it. But I did have some issues. So I started actually before Wrath of the Lich King came out. I started with its pre-patch, which came out in early September. I wanted to play the game in its fullest. I wanted to explore it. I wanted to do all the content. I wanted to get decent gear, and I wanted to experience its one raid. And I did all that, which I am proud to say. But my first issue was that I already had a character leveled at 70 in TBC, and that was my mage. And my mage was an Alliance mage on Ash Candy, I believe is the US server, and that's what it's called. The problem was that server was basically kind of dead for Alliance. I was having troubles finding groups for dungeons. There was no one really in Stormwind at the time. It was just hard, and I was trying to get this character geared because I haven't played on this character since the start of TBC. And the best way to gear were to do battlegrounds and dungeons, and I just couldn't. Or get into raid groups, which I didn't know how, and I just couldn't. So I had to switch to Horde on the server. And the problem that I found, or I paid more money to get a character transfer to a different server, which, as you know, if you follow the WoW server, issues, is that a lot of the top servers, the mega servers with all the Alliance or Horde players, like Benediction, for example, are locked. You can't get in it. It's impossible to get in it. And they also had massive queue problems with just really long 4-hour, 5-hour queues just to play the game. So because I was on a small server, I didn't have to experience that. The problem was that my character that was already leveled was on Alliance and not Horde, and I can't transfer that. So I ended up making a new character, and I ended up making a Death Knight because they start at level 55, so I didn't have to level that long. Leveling through TBC again was really fast. It was actually really enjoyable how fast it was to get that XP, to do those quests, and just to speed run it. Death Knights are super, strong and kind of overpowered, so that made it a lot easier as well. And I really enjoyed my time leveling. I did try starting from scratch with the Warlock, but it was just too slow for my liking, and I would not have made it in time for Wrath of the Lich King launch. It was just too slow. But I ended up doing a Death Knight, Unholy Death Knight, and it was really enjoyable level, and that's what I ended up sticking with for the rest of the expansion of my playtime so far. And I actually met another person who was leveling a DK, and he was telling me, hey, we could solo Blood Furnace essentially. So I spent a lot of time, or a decent amount of time, two-manning Blood Furnace, which was really fun. I didn't even know, as a new player, as a newbie to World of Warcraft, who barely kind of knows about the game, you could do that. And ending up doing that with him was a lot of fun, and really added to the experience of leveling through TBC. The server issues are something that I think need to be addressed. They just need to be addressed. It is not fun being locked out of characters that I want to play, or just content that I can do because of my faction or because of what server I'm on. Luckily, because I was on a small server, I never experienced queue times like others did on Benediction, but I did 100% want to play my mage into Burning Crusade and see what that's like, and I'll probably never do that unless I make a new mage and level it through 1 to 80, which I also will probably just never do, to be completely honest. So it is sad that that happened, and I think Blizzard definitely needs to address that in some shape or form. So, leveling. During this time, as I was leveling Classic, I also got Shadowlands for free, because Blizzard did a little promo and they gave out Shadowlands for free, and I ended up benefiting from that. So I also got to kind of experience a bit of what retail WoW is like with World of Warcraft Shadowlands, and it's night and day. I can tell you that I prefer Classic's gameplay style over Retail's gameplay style. I think Retail's leveling is definitely faster. It's a little bit more direct now, where like each zone kind of has a story quest or your Covenant quest or whatever that you just follow along and you level through that. But the dungeons, because you can just queue into a dungeon as much as you want, and the dungeons give a shit ton of XP, I think it's really fast to level in Retail. And this was on a mage that was level 50, I believe, and the max is 60, so I only have to level like 10 levels because this is a mage that I had from BFA. So it went really kind of smooth and fast. I have to play other classes in Retail to see if I enjoyed it, but I did not really enjoy playing mage. I played Frost and then I switched to Fire once I reached endgame, and it just felt like I did no damage. Like I watched like the open world just even felt difficult. Maybe that was due to my lack of gear, but it just felt like it took too much to kill bosses, and I was never really doing that much damage compared to Classic, where in Classic I was, hitting them for 20k crits or something like that, or not 20k but 2k crits or 1,000 damage, and it felt a lot more powerful and more fun to play my character than it does on Retail, where I was hitting them for maybe like 500 damage with a character that had like 17k health. So it just took forever with Retail, and I've seen like videos about this where you get in later games where in Retail there's a whole bunch of modifiers that modify damage, so you don't really feel like you have a lot of power unless you pop your big cooldowns that give you those big modifiers, and it definitely feels that way compared to Classic, where damage is a lot more consistent, and you can feel that in leveling, you can feel that in endgame, and I think those things definitely need to be addressed within the game, because you want damage to feel consistent and not like you're a pea shooter half the time and then you click a button you become a bazooka. So it was a very weird leveling experience going over in general with comparing the two with Retail and Classic. I really enjoyed Classic's Wrath of the Lich King's leveling experience. It definitely got kind of sluggish towards the end, and just doing quests over and over again can definitely be boring and tiresome, especially like since I was used to TBC leveling pre-patch, and you got the EXP buff that gave you like 50% more XP, which definitely made things faster. And then you had your flying mounts, which definitely also again made things faster. And then you go in Wrath of the Lich King and you kind of lose that. So it took me about maybe a week to level from 70 to 80 in Wrath of the Lich King, which I feel like is a decent amount of time. But if you have a job, it would take a lot slower. And I definitely probably could have gone faster and harder on that leveling process, but I wanted to do other things. I was getting burnt. I couldn't just be playing World of Warcraft, for 12 hours of my day. I just can't do that at this point in time. So leveling overall, I would say is really fun. Comparing it to other games now, when it compare it to something like Final Fantasy, for example, Final Fantasy leveling is actually not, it doesn't really have leveling. I would say your first initial leveling process when you're leveling your first character or job or class in that game is the story. You're getting all your XP from the story, and you're just going through the story. So you're not really leveling in the sense that like how WoW has leveling, like you do your quests to get XP or you do dungeons to get XP to get to endgame. For Final Fantasy, it's all gated by story. So it's more of a single player experience of getting levels than anything else. Now, leveling alts in Final Fantasy is, again, very different, because then you have content that is made just to level alts, like Palace of the Dead, for example. You level that to a certain level, I believe it's 50 or something, or 60 like that. I think it's actually 60. And then you go do Tower on High, or Tower of Heaven, or I'm forgetting what the content's called, the Stormblood equivalent of Palace of the Dead. And you do that until a certain level, and then once you get into that, you may go do Eureka, or you may go do the Bulgarian Front to get levels until you level to max level, which is currently, I believe, 90 or 80 at the moment. So like it's a more of a process to level alts than just questing over and over again. And I kind of prefer Final Fantasy's story questing, which was more in line with retail leveling, than Classics just doing quests over and over again, because quests never really got me, but dungeons on the other hand did. One thing why I want to talk about too is just zones in general. I absolutely loved Wrath of the Lich King zones. They were all beautiful. I can see why everyone praises Grizzly Hills as like seen as like one of the best zones they ever did. They are absolutely beautiful. How basically all of them are like tundras and icy. You could feel like you are in the Nordic parts of the world. Of like, if I was here on Earth, I would be like in Iceland and see all those forests and all that. But then it also has its, World of Warcraft aesthetic of like temples and stuff like that, where you get to the troll zone. And the zones were absolutely 10 out of 10. Like, I cannot complain about how much I like the zones. And one thing that I've noticed, which is a huge factor for me, is leveling through Wrath of the Lich King zones and going through, taking shortcuts off the beaten path. And if I aggro mobs, I can just run past them, or I can kill them, real fast, because again, as we talked about, damage is just, really kind of consistent and high. In retail, that's not the case. In retail, it is so fucking annoying to traverse paths off the beaten path. While retail zones are, again, yes, they are beautiful. The art is great in retail. The music is also really good. But going off the beaten path, and there's just hordes of mobs that will then just, aggro on you and, beat you down and then knock you off your horse. You can't run past them. They take forever to kill. I want to avoid mobs as much as possible in retail WoW and getting off the beaten path, which essentially stops me from exploring the zones and really experiencing the zones, because if I do, I get punished by 20 or 50 groups of mobs in one area, and my character's not strong enough, or has gear, or my damage isn't consistent. I don't know what the fuck it is to really group all these mobs and DPS them real quick, like I can in Classic. So zones versus Classic versus retail with mob density or something like that, I think needs to be looked at. Now, Dragonflight does come out in, the pre-patch starts in like a couple weeks actually, and it comes out in like a month. And will we see some sort of difference with Dragonflight zones when it comes to like mob density or pathing, especially now because they have the new Guild Wars flying system, right? I don't know. It will be interesting. I do not intend to play Dragonflight at launch. Maybe at a later date. Maybe if I hear it has, it was actually a good expansion and they got rid of a lot of the bullshit and it's actually really fun to play. Maybe I will try that. But I don't know at this point in time. I can't speak on that. But I can speak on the zones between Classic and current retail, and I think that's something they definitely need to address. Dungeons. Let's talk about dungeons. Dungeons were actually, I think they're a lot of fun. I really enjoy WoW dungeons. They're probably my favorite part of the game, and compared to Final Fantasy, for example. Final Fantasy dungeons are very linear. They're all pretty much the same. there's two, or actually there's probably 4 packs, big packs of mobs in each hallway of trash, and you pull 2 of them at a time, and you AoE them down, and then you move on to the next, and you AoE those down, and then there's a boss. You do the boss, and you rinse and repeat. There's no questing in the dungeon. There's no real like exploring in the dungeon. It's just quick and easy, real fast. The loot really isn't worth it. There's no real reason to do Final Fantasy dungeons other than to experience it once. Maybe if you have a piece of glamour or loot in there that you want, and then to get tombstones for the actual endgame loot in the game. That's the only reason you're really running Final Fantasy dungeons. You're not meeting up with people. You're not going to a physical location. You're doing none of that in Final Fantasy dungeons. And for that, the dungeons have always been somewhat of a letdown. Now, in the recent patch, they did add like really, really, really hard dungeons that you can't get duty findered into, and you have to have a pre-made group. Maybe that's different. I haven't experienced that, but in WoW's case, it's night and day. Moving on. So with WoW dungeons, I don't like how like not having a instant group finder that just automatically queues me into people, especially being a DPS. But I never really had a problem with this. If there was a group finder that just found the group of people for you, but you still have to physically go to the dungeon location, to me that's a okay compromise. I know there's a lot of negative stigma or debate around this topic and having an instant dungeon finder and things like that, but to me it's just like I just want to go and experience the dungeon. So finding, and then maybe for like harder groups, for like heroic, maybe then you have to find, or like I know WoW has Mythic Plus in retail, then you have to find people to actually form groups with. But for low level dungeons and just heroic, if it's just grouped you with people automatically, and then you just, have to physically go to the location, I would be okay with that. The dungeons themselves, I think, are actually they can be confusing at first. TBC didn't have maps, dungeon maps, so you don't know like where the bosses are or where you're supposed to be going, but Wrath of the Lich King does have that, and I think that helps out a lot. Add-ons, the use of add-ons, I think also just adds a lot of quality of life features that are there already in retail, but you just have to add them in Classic, and it just makes the experience a little bit better overall to know like what items drop from X boss and what loot you're going for and where it is and how to get it, and also who's the boss and who's not the boss. But the dungeons themselves, I thought were like very well designed. There were a couple dungeons I don't like. A lot of bosses in Wrath of the Lich King have like invuln phases, which I think are very, very annoying, because you go and you kind of blow your load, or you start to blow your load, and in the sense of popping cooldowns and potions, and start getting the flow of your rotation, and the boss just says, hold up, I'm gonna go invulnerable, or go into a phase where you cannot do damage to me or hit me for a couple of seconds. You gotta kill this ad, and then you can kill me. A lot of bosses have that design in Wrath of the Lich King, and I even saw a meme about it, and it's kind of annoying, honestly, that's the go-to mechanic for a lot of bosses. But other than that, the mobs themselves aren't really a complaint. The how long they take, some can go really fast, some can go really slow. I found that's more on gear and party composition and the players that you have rather than not. Some players know their limits better than others. For example, I actually tanked for the first time in WoW like ever, and I just did not know my limits. I didn't know what I could and could not do, which in Final Fantasy is very, the limits are very easily identified, and you can know what you can and cannot do. You know how to hold aggro in that game. Tanking is a lot easier in Final Fantasy, it seems like, than it is in WoW, at least from the minimum experience that I have. And you can see that within certain players, and that determines the speed and the pace and how long dungeons take. But most of the times I didn't have problems with groups. They're very nice, very easy. Everyone went and got their loot, and it was very, very, pleasant experience going through these dungeons and leveling. Even in endgame, when I was doing heroics, it was still a pleasant experience. I never had problems with people or with loot drops or with trolls or all those infamous stories that you hear about World of Warcraft with toxicity. I never ran into those. Maybe that's just me and how I tackle things with the when it comes to group content, but I never really experienced that, even when I was pugging the raid. Loot itself, I went more in depth into it. So normally I just look at an add-on to see whether it's a good piece of gear or a bad piece of gear. This time I kind of looked at stats itself and looked at the numbers to see, what my class wanted and what my class didn't. And I still think as a new player coming in, it's kind of confusing. In retail, it just seems like you just take whatever the highest item level is. Seems to be the consensus of loot. That's not how it goes in Classic at all, but it's just kind of still can be confusing because you have so many options, which is a good thing. I think it's a good thing to have options to get what type of loot you want. The problem becomes is that, for example, in Final Fantasy, loot is never an issue in Final Fantasy because one, you get your best in slot gear from the raid, which you're generally doing this, which I'll get into in a second, or you get it from tombstones and vendors. So you always get personal loot, and that's the big thing here. Within World of Warcraft, anyone can roll for the loot. No matter the class, no matter the loot type, no matter the stats, anyone can roll for it. Which means I can essentially screw out my healer. If a really good healer piece drops, and I'm a DPS or a tank, I can take that dude's loot and roll on it and win it. I can screw him out of his loot. And I think that's where a lot of the negative stigmas come from because of that you can do that. There's no personal loot. Now in retail, I think there is like personal loot where you kill a boss and it gives you your own personal loot. And I think that's how it should be. Classics, that's not the case. You can screw anyone out of loot. And in Final Fantasy, it's personal loot, And if it is, open loot, as a DPS, I can't need on a healer piece. I can only greed on it. And that's perfectly fine. So no one gets mad about loot, because if you're a healer and you need on the healer piece, well, then you're only competing against other healers. You're going to get it. It's a 50-50. There's generally only 2 healers in Final Fantasy. But, in WoW, if for some reason the DPS can also need on it, it doesn't make sense. So loot it's handled better in retail, and I think Final Fantasy than it is in Classic. So you kind of gotta trust the person more in Classic. I never had problems with loot because now I kind of understood that. And once you understand that rule and how loot works overall in the game, you don't have issues with it. Because you just get the pieces that you want. I still got a little antsy needing on stuff that I wanted, even though I may not use it or end up ever using it. But it's still I still got the stuff that I want in the loot overall, and I never ran into problems like I did in TBC when I played the first time around. And then in terms of raiding loot with master loot, I think it's fine. Master loot, every one dude gets it and he gets to dispute it whoever he wants. That's kind of how he did it in Final Fantasy with my task, where if a piece of loot dropped and I was a DPS and I needed that slot, if I spoke up, I kind of got priority among before anyone else, or we just needed it or rolled on it, and just anyone said fuck it, and anyone got the loot. So you never really run into ninja looting or stuff like that in Final Fantasy. You can't do it because it's a general consensus. Yes, Final Fantasy does have master loot. You can turn that on, but no one really cares, or is that invested in loot, I can say. And everyone kind of trusts people in the general consensus, the player base. And in WoW, when I did my raid and I did it with a complete pug, I didn't, I wasn't really doing it for loot. I don't care what the loot I got. I did get some things. And it was another just guild. They were running it and they just took me along. I didn't have problems with them, like, at all, even with master loot, and I wasn't gonna like ninja loot something that I wouldn't like need or whatever. It's just people being assholes at the end of the day. That's honestly what I think. So now with that, let's get into the raid. So the raid, this was my end game goal. I want to experience what raiding was like in World of Warcraft. I've never officially kind of done it, excuse me. And even though it was a pug, I still ended up having a lot of fun. I have a lot of issues with WoW's raiding, but it was still a lot of fun. So generally, before I went in, I heard that I did max Rammus 10-man. I heard that it was really, really easy. And it was. I just had like a video up. I watched the video of the mechanics of the boss, and I did the boss and killed it. And we generally killed a lot of bosses first time. The only bosses that gave us like trouble was the Spider-Man, or the Spider boss, the boss where you have to do that jump that everyone warns you about, and it has the negative positive, and I think there was one other, but I'm forgetting. But those are like the only bosses, and the only reason those bosses gave us trouble, from my understanding, is that we had a off tank who just wanted to learn how to tank the spider boss, and the DPS went a little too hard. He didn't have enough health, and we died. And then when it came to the negative positive boss, the first time, maybe we had some first timers, and people are idiots. I will say this: people are idiots. They don't know, positive or clockwise. In the video, it was, I think, negative was on the right and positive was on the left, according to the boss. And our raid leader wanted to do red right, which was positive on the right, and then you just rotate clockwise or counterclockwise, which means if you're on the right, you go over through the top of him, and if you're on the left, you go over through the bottom of him. And people just, they didn't know that. Plus, to be completely honest, like with World of Warcraft, the add-ons, DMB or Big Boss Mod or whatever it's called, does all the work for you. It tells you the mechanics, it tells you when they're going off, it tells you when it's going to happen. It does everything for you. You don't have to know a single thing, unlike Final Fantasy, where like you have to know the dance in order to beat the boss. And WoW, it just seems like this add-on just tells me everything I need to know. It's super easy. I can see now why people complain about retail and the difficulty of it on just the ads being impossible, because the designers have had to 100%, I believe, had to fight this add-on from telling players what to do and where to stand and just turning their brain off. They should probably get rid of it, and I think it will probably be a better rating experience overall to actually have to know the mechanics instead of just an add-on telling you what to do. So those are like the bosses. It was easy overall. I enjoyed a lot of bosses. The reason why I think I really like WoW raiding is for the aesthetic of it. Going into this dungeon with 10 man and fighting this big boss and having to do these kind of trash pulls and stuff like that, is a really fun experience. It's a large scale dungeon experience. If you enjoy dungeons, you enjoy raiding, because raiding is a larger scale of dungeons. That's essentially it. When I first joined the raid leader just said, yeah, this is essentially a large heroic dungeon. And that's what it was. And it was a lot of fun to do. But it is too large. And it just becomes, a slugfest. I was in this raid. I was pugging it. I just joined this dude, messaged and be like, hey, can I join? Yes. I didn't say a single thing. I didn't interact with anyone in the raid. I just showed up, DPS, did the mechanics, did the boss, got the 2 or 3 pieces of loot that I wanted, and got the fuck out. It was that easy. And as soon as I completed that, I have kind of had no real motivation to go back and play World of Warcraft, really. I felt like I did what I set out to do. I completed the goals that I stated, and it is now over. Will I go back and play the game and check out new content? Yes. I want to see what Olderar, I believe that's the raid. People said that is a very, very exciting raid. I want to see what that is about when it comes out. I want to see how what is Icecrown Citadel, the final raid of the expansion with the Lich King, is like, yes, I do want to experience those. But in terms of right now with Endgame, I've kind of completed it. Is my character maxed out, best in slot, has all the gear? No, but he has a decent amount of gear. And reason why I like this raiding, and I don't think I can commit to it officially, even with my time schedule, is that it took almost 4 hours to complete. The VOD that I have is like 3 hours and 35 minutes until we killed Nax Ramus with a couple of wipes. And even though it's easy and I think the difficulty is fine for casually enjoying, it's way too long of a time commitment to raid in World of Warcraft. In Final Fantasy, raids can take an hour or two, depending on gear, depending on how good or how used you are into the fight. Each fight is at maximum, has a set time limit, and generally to enrage. And generally it's either like 8 minutes or 12 minutes or like 17 minutes. For example, P4 or P3S, which is the Phoenix boss, which is the hardest boss in that raid tier to Shadowlands, or not Shadowlands, Endwalker, my bad, in Final Fantasy, is only a 17-minute fight, I think, total, off the top of my head. That's the bare minimum of how long that fight's going to take until it rages. 17 minutes, that's all you have. So that means that if that's 17 minutes, and the fight before that is 8 minutes, and the fight before that is 10 minutes, and you just add up these like very short 20-minute fights at the end of the day, then it's only going to take like an hour or two, or an hour and a half to complete the entire raid wing. But in WoW, it took almost 4 hours. Why? Well, in Final Fantasy, there's no trash. You just zone into the raid, and the boss is right there, and you just kill the boss, and that's it. That's it. It's just the boss fight. Now, with WoW raids being more of a glorified dungeon, you have trash mobs, which is perfectly fine, but the trash does take a decent amount of time. And really, that's not even the issue, I think, here. I think the issue is just traversing the environment, where this dungeon is huge. It is a huge dungeon. I don't have a mount to, teleport me to the boss straight away, or anything like that. As soon as you killed the final boss in Nax Ramus, there are teleporters to teleport you back to the start of the raid. It's just a huge space, and it just takes way too much time with the addition of mobs, with the addition to kill, to traverse the space with like traps or whatever, the poison goo that they have in Nax Ramus and certain wings of it. It just takes too long to traverse the space. Even on dying, if you die, you have to fly back, which takes maybe 2 or 3 minutes, and then you have to run back, which takes maybe 5 minutes. And if you don't get a summon, if you don't have a warlock or to summon you back into the raid, maybe you get lost. Maybe there's mobs that you guys just didn't clear because it's in the space. Maybe you die again. Maybe you have to repair it, and you don't have a repair bot. Luckily, someone in my raid knows the game and had a repair bot for me. Otherwise, I would have to D-zone, run all the way back, then get a summon. It just takes too much time. Was my biggest issue with the raid. And I didn't eat, I didn't have food, I couldn't stop to get food, we weren't taking breaks. I was pretty exhausted. And they even said when doing the raid that our raid time is in, or our raid time is up. And would you guys like to continue? Now, when I was raiding Final Fantasy, this happened multiple times, but it was mostly due to prog, where we were just progging and the entire 2 hours, and we ran out of time. But in this case, we weren't progging, we were actually killing the bosses. Even though it was my first time doing it and I didn't know what the fuck to do, we were killing the bosses, and we still ran out of raid time. And that was, again, maybe like 2 hours or about 3 hours in. And then but we only had 2 bosses left to kill. We went, we did it, we killed them, bada bing, bada boom. That's the end of it. But that's probably my biggest issue with WoW raiding, is just it takes way too long. It's casual, it's fun, it's easy, it's rewarding. The bosses aren't completely brain dead, But other than the DBZ add-on or whatever it's called, or Big Dragons or whatever the add-on is called, telling you what to do so you don't have to learn the fight, and just being the walkbacks and the trash mobs just being so long, the rating it's a huge time commitment. I could see why it's fallen down in retail and people have those conversations. So anyway, that's gonna conclude the talk. I pretty much covered everything I wanted to cover about Wrath of the Lich King. It is still like a really fun experience. I wish my friends really came with me into it and experienced it with me. It's fun. I can't wait to see what it has to offer. I can see why people love to talk about it, 12 or 14 years ago when it originally came out, and I was 7 years old or 8 years old. I can see why it is the WoW expansion, why it's the top WoW expansion. It's something I haven't experienced at all with my previous encounters with World of Warcraft, with BFA, with TBC. Eventually I just got exhausted, and I just quit because of exhaustion with the game. This time I quit because I accomplished all my goals. I felt like I beat the game. I set out what I wanted to do, and that's two big differences on why players may stop playing the game, and shows what is a good expansion versus a bad expansion. For example, I love Final Fantasy, and I would be playing it now, but the only thing I would have to do is to raid. That's the only thing I have left to do, is just the new raid. Other than that, other than like the new content they've come out, I've done everything. I've essentially beaten the game, and that's why I'm not playing it. That's gonna be the talk. Yes, that's gonna be the talk. Make sure to leave a like, follow, and subscribe. It really helps me out. If you want to listen to our past shows, our past seasons, our past After Dark episodes, those are all up on our YouTube channel. It's Not a Sport at YouTube. Check out our social media as well, and our website as well, where you can read some more game design specific things and look at how my game design philosophy and how you can make a game and that as well. Anyway, this is going to be your host, Salty Waffles, signing off, and I hope you are having a wonderful climb.